Great. As more people trickle in, we'll wait just a couple more minutes and then we'll start. This is the first colloquium for emo for the semester, and we're very excited to have with us Swapna, Sarah, and Kristen. Sarah is going to start with a short overview of emo, the changes in organization, and then we'll proceed with the colloquium. If you have questions, thoughts, concerns, anything, drop them in the chat, or also feel free to use the reaction and just raise your hand during the chat, the discussion, and you can ask a question directly. We really want this to be as interactive as possible, so feel free to just ask questions, add your thoughts. There'll be a time for also add your questions, but you can add them at any time during the chat. All right, maybe this is a good time to start. More people usually trickle in also during the chat, and we want to have enough time to have a short introduction from Sarah Linardi, our new executive director for emo. But again, welcome everyone who just joined. And this is the first colloquium for the semester, and we're very excited to have you all. Please feel free to contribute with questions, thoughts throughout. And Sarah, I'll give it to you.
Thank you so much, Anna. Hi, I'm Sarah Linardi. I'm the executive director for emo. Started this January. This is for 2024. So I'm just gonna just give like a little intro of emo. We've been working a lot on just reframing and then just being more sharp and specific about like what we do. The new logo, if people have been in last year's emo conference, when the new logo is unveiled. So emo is now MD4SG and emo together, just with this name. What is emo? It's a global community of researchers working towards equity and access. It came from MD4SG in 2016. We have about 2,000 members in 130 institutions in 50 countries. And the mission is to build a community that places the perspective and interest of marginalized communities at the foundation of algorithmic systems. And the reason why we focus on this is because we feel that algorithmic systems are very powerful. And if we were able to bring this perspective into the foundations, it will have ripple effects all throughout. So some of our goals are, first one is building a community. So we need to build a community of researcher, practitioner, and people with lived experience to diagnose what are under-resourced areas and what are issues of resource allocation mechanisms. We want to do outreach so we can create safe spaces where historically marginalized community can be partners in this conversation, have their voices heard. And a big goal is research to harness computational tools, but in an interdisciplinary context, in an interdisciplinary discussion of how equity and access affects historically marginalized groups, and to be very conscious of infrastructures, right? Like the reason why we have these issues is because there are gaps between research and deployment, and there's differences in incentives between research and deployment, in audiences, in the funding models, in the human capital, and we need to develop bridges to narrow them. So this is kind of like the four things that emo is working on. and our programs support these 4 goals. Our guiding principles first acknowledge the power structure in academic work, how the nature of the work and the identity of the people doing the work may result in systems that don't integrate people who actually experience them. And that, the reason why we use mathematical and computational methods is because they're very powerful. They measure how equity and access is defined. They also define how they are integrated into platforms, what are being optimized. And so they're the fundamentals, but they are not adequate. These tools can be exclusionary, and that's why it's really important in emo to incorporate social and humanistic sciences as well as practice fields. And another thing that is really different, I think, about emo is that emo is grassroots. Most of our members are junior faculty or junior researchers, PhD students, master's students, community members. And so we believe that expertise lies in many, many different places, and everyone, regardless of their institutional affiliation or geography or background, has the opportunity to shape emo initiative. So if you see this and you say, I want to do something, please contact us, and we will be very excited to sit with you and figure out how that fits into emo. Another important thing about emo is we believe in long-term community. So we've had multiple interactions with many of you in many different contexts, both in virtual and physical spaces. And we're going to push harder even on this area and pool resources, share resources, so that what you do, which we believe in, can be sustained and can result in fundamental changes. So if you've been in emo before, you know what our programs are. We have the ACM emo conference this year. It's October 29th to 31st in San Luis Potosi in Mexico. Today is the last day to submit. And I think this is like up till midnight, and for some places it's until 8 a.m. tomorrow morning. We have working groups, conversations with practitioners, which Kristen here leads, law, algorithm, and policy, inequality working group, and equity and justice for indigenous community in Latin America. If you want to sign up to be an emo member, you can, Anna will drop a link that you can sign up for. We also have peer support network. We have a doctoral consortium. The last day to sign up, I think, for this year to be at the ACM emo conference, doctoral consortium, is May 3rd. We have a faculty network that helps faculty build interdisciplinary collaboration, go through the tenure process, think about publishing. Again, you can sign up for all of this at the link that Anna put into the chat. We have outreach program. We have a summer science program with the indigenous community in San Luis Potosi. They've been part of our conferences for several years. And we have now also a public interest technology summer sessions with the Pitt New England Network. That is the emo core methods series. And last is the series of colloquium. So today we have Swapna, very happy to have her. And on Friday, 4/26, we will have Melissa Dell. And then on the week after that, Friday, May 3rd, we will have David Adelani. So I hope that gives you a good sense of where we are with emo. Okay. So I'm gonna now just introduce our moderator and our speaker. So okay, so give me a second. You guys are able to hear me, right? Okay. All right. So today we have Kristen Scott. She is a PhD student in computer science at KU Leuven and a Marie Curie early stage researcher. She has been a co-organizer of EMO's Conversation with Practitioner Working Group since 2022. What does this group do? They bring researchers into conversations with practitioners who work with marginalized group, and they do semi-structured interviews. So you can message Kristen, and they have a lot of Medium articles that they've written on this on these interviews, and they are also writing an academic paper on it. So if you're a researcher who wants to learn from practitioner, or if you are a practitioner that wants to build closer relationship with researcher, please join the Conversation with Practitioner working group. And Kristen will be interviewing Swapna. So Swapna Reddy is a social entrepreneur, an Ashoka Fellow, and a lawyer who co-founded the Asylum Seeker Advocacy Project, or ASAP, in 2015. Do I say ASAP or ASAP?
We usually say ASAP, but anything is fine.
Sorry?
I said we usually say ASAP, but anything is fine.
ASAP. Okay, great. ASAP. All right. So ASAP is a nonprofit organization that strives to improve the life of asylum seekers in the United States. Swapna is not a stranger to the emo community. She has been involved with the Conversation with Practitioners working group in 2021. And we're really excited that she will be able to bring her legal expertise, tremendous empathy. If you read articles about Swapna, she's like really has a perspective of how people are experiencing the systems and like years of experience of building ASAP to emo. So thank you so much. All right, I'll pass it on to Kristen now.
Hi, Swapna. Thank you for joining us. It's great to see you.
Hi, thank you all for having me.
So I wanted to start if maybe you could give us an overview of the work and the functioning of ASAP.
Sure. So thanks for having me again. I think I spoke to some people in this community 3 years ago. Since then, we've actually grown by about 500,000 members. So we've been growing pretty quickly over the past few years. We're an organization that is a membership organization. Our members are people who are seeking asylum in the United States. We've been welcoming thousands of new members a week for 150 weeks and counting. So we've been growing pretty fast. Our organization is basically just built to do what our members want it to do. So what that means is we answer members' individual legal questions about navigating the US immigration system. We produce resources based on their questions. If we get the same question a lot of times, it suggests there's some kind of collective confusion or collective resources would be helpful. So we produce how-to videos and explainers to help people navigate the process on their own. And then we also work with our members towards changing the system. So, you know, if you hear the same problem being raised hundreds of times, you have to ask, like, can we fix this? And so we work with our members to collectively fix the problems that they identify as kind of standing in their way the most. For our members right now, those things often relate to backlogs in immigration systems processing times and also issues related to access to legal work permits.
Okay, and would you be able to maybe paint a picture for us of the experiences and processes that a typical asylum seeker might go through once they arrive in the US?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there's a lot of like stereotypes of who an asylum seeker is or are, but it's just like there is no standard experience. You know, people seek asylum for many reasons. Some people are not safe in their country of origin and go through kind of like harrowing journeys, sometimes overland, sometimes hundreds of miles to end up at the Mexico-US border. Other people are an academic researcher who came to the US with the plan to return to their home country, and in the middle of their PhD process, the country became destabilized and it was no longer a viable place to return. So kind of people can be, you know, we've even had people who were on a tourist trip to the United States and then like a surprising coup happened abroad and now they're trying to figure out like where are they going to be living longer term. So it can look very different for a lot of people, like how have they ended up being an asylum seeker in the United States. But once you are here and you realize that you need to seek asylum, there are kind of a couple paths. One is that your kind of desire to seek asylum is unknown to the US government. And so you kind of voluntarily submit a form to the government saying, you know, this is a common trajectory for someone who maybe is like a student and now needs to stay in the US longer term for safety reasons. We'll say, you know, I'm in the United States. I'm submitting this paper form to say that I intend to seek asylum. And then you end up in a process that's hypothetically non-adversarial. In process, it can be pretty rigorous and intense and traumatic interviews process, but That's one stage you can go. So if you go down this path, which is called the affirmative process, there are huge backlogs. You could be waiting, 6, 7, 8 years just to have your interview to find out if you qualify for asylum. And during that process, during that time, you're in a pretty insecure immigration status. If you win asylum, you are on a pathway to citizenship. But in the meantime, you are kind of like in limbo. And our members are having a lot of problems when they're stuck in this limbo period, including just the ability to have stable access to work permits for this 6 or 8 years while they're just waiting for their case to be heard. There's another process you can end up in where, for instance, maybe you've had some like interaction with law enforcement. For instance, suppose you were pulled over for speeding and you did come to the US to escape some kind of danger. You can end up being put through a process that's called defensive, which is like a court system. It too has long backlogs. Those people still do have issues with being able to secure work permits. They have an added difficulty, which is that they might also be detained during their process. So now they are ending up being held in a prison-like situation for many years as their case is being processed. So those are two of the kind of paths, but what gets people into those two paths looks incredibly different for different people.
Okay, thank you. You mentioned already that the work your organization does is essentially based on member priorities. So I wanted to hear about how you collect that member input and how it sort of incorporated into your work.
Thanks. That's a great question. I think, our members' priorities like 100% defined. Like everything ASAP does can be tracked pretty directly back to our members' priorities. When people join ASAP, one of the questions we ask optionally is, we're obviously just trying to get some basic information. Do you prefer for us to communicate with you via SMS or email? What's your country of origin? Where are you now based in the United States? These things can be relevant to what resources are most helpful for people. But another question we optionally ask is, what's one thing you would like to change about the US asylum system or the asylum process? And we've had over 100,000 of our members optionally provide answers to that question. And that has formed kind of the core identity of ASAP's work and what we're trying to do here. And so we go through the process. I know that you could automate such a thing, but this is something we actually have intentionally not automated, is that we read every single member's answer, because we think it's a very powerful use of staff members' time to read what hundreds of our members have told us they want to see changed in the system and have that kind of baked into how they're thinking about the different choices we could be making about how we spend our time. But we kind of code all of those responses. We aggregate them. It's a free write. We're not trying to constrain people. And in other contexts, we do not do free write surveys because it's very time intensive. But in this situation, we let people just share what they'd like to see changed. And from that, we produce what we call our policy priorities, which are, 100,000 plus people's vote essentially, and how we should be focusing our time. One of the things that's really great about this free write situation is that we both end up seeing what a lot of people would like to see changed about the system, but we also learn a lot about the ways in which our members want to change the system. So some people say something very simple, like, I need to get a work permit and I can't, the processing delays are too long. Other people will say that same thing and say, instead, the system should look like this, So members are giving us like really powerful visions of how to solve the problem, not just what the problem is. And so we also collect kind of what are the different suggestions of solutions our members have given us. And that also will inform, we do other surveys, but that is the beginning of how we start to think about not just what problem should we solve, but how exactly should we solve them. It also helps us to see members who are just like very powerful, forceful speaker. I mean, if you have to imagine a collection of, now we have about 630,000 members. And if you include their children who are also in the asylum system, this will be the year we grow to serve over 1 million asylum seekers in the United States. You can imagine that these are people who have oftentimes fled other countries specifically because of their ability to inspire people, to dream up solutions, to mobilize support behind their agendas, and now are being targeted as a result of it. And so it's a pretty incredible source of information and kind of like vision and goal setting. And, so That's what the process looks like a little bit. But from there, we kind of like, we don't advocate for anything unless it is one of our members' collective highest priorities. That comes up a lot in the immigrants' rights movement in the United States, for instance. One of the biggest calls for change is that everyone should be entitled a lawyer as they go through their immigration proceedings. We're certainly not opposed to that, but it's also not what our members are asking for. It's very rare that members ask for free access to a lawyer as like the thing they want to see in the system. It's very common for members to ask for a system in which they can participate directly themselves. So can we participate in more languages? Right now, you have to be participating in English, or in some cases, provide your own interpreter or translator for an interview if you're not going to be speaking in English. They're asking for things to be less in legalese so they can understand the forms, things like that. So that means that when we're out in the world advocating, we're very likely to advocate for things for like, can we bring this process, can this become an online process? Could the government release an API so we can start to build things like the TurboTax of immigration, which could make a more accessible solution for people who have to fill things out on their own? Can we shorten this form? It used to, just 6 years ago, this form was 3 pages and now it's 11 pages. Why? Can we make it 3 pages again? Those are the same years in which the backlog has become a lot worse, you know? So those are the kind of things that we will advocate for because it's what our members are telling us to advocate for. It means that often we're not joining. It's not that we're opposed, but we're not joining what a lot of the other like immigrants' rights organizations are pushing because it's not in line with what our members who are directly impacted by the system are asking us to push. It's not the kind of fixes they want. It's not the way that they want the problem to be solved.
Wow, that's incredibly interesting. You mentioned this turbo taxes for asylum seekers, and I think I've heard you mention this before. So I'm wondering if that is something like sort of an idea in the air or a specific initiative that's being followed up on.
I mean, it's just an example of something where you've seen like progress and solutions in one space that have kind of like shot way past like the level of progress or solution in another space where like, and you know, so it's not, we can't do it until the government releases an API that would allow us to build software that kind of can directly submit, where we could directly submit something to the government, which is unlike, for instance, in the tax context or in the Freedom of Information Act context. Those are both contexts in which the US government has released an API. So it is possible to build software or build, you know, some kind of system that will allow you to just directly online submit, you know, a third party, not the government, can build a more accessible way for people to submit a Freedom of Information Act request to the government, or they can directly submit their taxes to the government. I know a lot of us who are based in the United States who've had to file US taxes have used like TurboTaxes software or H&R Block software to submit our taxes because it's very complicated. It's not that we are incapable of submitting a paper form, but it is like a lot of time. It's a lot of legalese. It's a lot of things, and we don't want to spend our time that way. And the same thing is happening in the US immigration system. The same kind of form, like where all of us are like, no, it's too annoying to fill out this form, read all the fine prints, like assemble it in just the right way, sign this thing, just mail my check with, go to the post office. Like that same thing is happening. And like the IRS is able to process a huge number of applications much more efficiently because it has kind of solved this. There's a solution, which is allowing third-party actors in who want to, you know, I'm sure there's a lot of money to be made in the immigration space. Like we don't charge dues. We're not going to charge anyone to fill out forms, but I think there's other people who like the market could solve some of the accessibility problem by people entering to be like, you know, we would like to produce something that makes it easier for people to apply for green cards, to make it easier for people to apply for naturalization, et cetera. So it's just one huge step forward in solving the, like one potential big solution to solving backlogs, which is our members' #1 priority is kind of like, can we speed up this system? It's not the members' #1 priority, by the way, is can we fundamentally change the laws about who is an asylum seeker or something, but just like, can someone just give us a decision about whether we are going to be found to be an asylum seeker or not? Like, do I have a long-term pathway or future in this country or not? Is like a, you know, is like a lower bar of what our members are asking for.
Okay. I wanted to turn the conversation a bit more to your organization's use of data and data collection. Because I believe that you also conduct some more detailed surveys of your many members. And so I'm curious about what the processes are there, especially issues around, access to data, including that the open survey you mentioned previously, like access to that, issues around privacy, what you do and cannot do not collect, etc.
That's a great question. I mean, I think maybe like on a first privacy level, we do not survey our member, we are only communicating with our members who are 18 and over. So we're making no attempts to communicate with any children for reasons related to consent and privacy and things like that. So that's just like one baseline fact. But in terms of why do we try to survey our members, I think we have a pretty strict rule at ASAP that we can't survey our members like just because we want to know some facts or something. It has to be because they're concretely, before we survey our members, we can articulate like the fact that the results of the survey will lead us down different potential action steps that we can articulate, like that we have written the survey in such a way where the results will determine whether we're going to take like action A, action B, or action C, that whatever that subject matter is, it's directly in furtherance of like a priority our members have told us to achieve. So concretely, an example is our members have told us that it's taking so long to renew their work permits. Like this is a real example. They got a work permit successfully the first time. It maybe was a painful process, but they have received a first initial work permit. Now it's about to expire. They've in the timely fashion, they've applied to the government. Their case is still in a backlog. They're asking the government, can I just have a second work permit? This one's going to expire. I don't have an interview date yet. I need to keep working in the US. I've now secured a job. I need to keep working. We found out that thousands of our members were basically having to lose their jobs because they were not getting their work permits in time. This was during the pandemic. Our members were doctors in a ER, like in a COVID unit, truck drivers who were delivering PPE like around the country, masks, etc., childcare workers who were the only reason that their employers could be COVID essential workers, et cetera. It was a very painful time to have unnecessary labor shortages for the world. And obviously, even more importantly to me, a painful time to be an immigrant who should be entitled to work and can't. So that was a big issue that was being raised for our members. And we had to ask like, okay, this is about backlogs and work permits, like priority 1 and 2. Those are the things our members want us to care about most. Is there something concrete we can do about this? Yes, in that instance, we could bring a lawsuit challenging, like the government was not making good on its like legal obligation to process these work permits more quickly and make sure that people weren't falling out of the workforce. So like we can bring a lawsuit. But first, let's ask our members, like, is this a path you think we should we bring a lawsuit? If we did bring a lawsuit, would you maybe want to be a plaintiff, one of the people who is individually suing the government on behalf of the collective of members who are experiencing this issue? Do you not want to do that? That's pretty intense life choice. Like I can see why people don't want to. Would you instead like to speak out publicly about the importance of work permits for asylum seekers? So support this initiative in other ways short of bringing the lawsuit? Or would you like to be in like a different category where you're just not really trying to do any of that level of activism in your life while you're in an insecure immigration status, but instead you would like to get really frequent updates, like stay very abreast of this specific issue so that you can be one of the people who is better served when it's time to like make a collective decision. And then a last option, do you just want to participate in collective data collection? Like, do you want to just participate in a participatory data collection process so we can understand the scope of this problem? Like, you don't want to do any of this other stuff, but you would still like to support the effort by telling us, like, are you somebody who's stuck in this backlog? If so, how long have you been waiting for your work permit? Are you somebody who had a job and had to lose your job because you've been waiting for so long, et cetera? And so that's an example of a more in-depth survey we sent out. The result of that was we were able to confirm that thousands of our members were stuck in this backlog. That was really useful. Something very powerful about the fact that we can poll our members is that we don't have to take the government's word for anything. We can, like, the government might say, we're processing the work permits fine. There isn't any major issue with backlogs. And normally in the United States, often a way to challenge that is to bring a lawsuit and enter a process called discovery and say, really? Show us your records, et cetera. It's very intense to bring a lawsuit and go through discovery And sometimes you might learn that what you thought was true is true. Like, wow, the government is really bad at this, and we're proving it with the records. But you might also get records that show that it's not exactly what you thought, and that undermines your goal, et cetera. So this is almost like a world in which you can conduct a discovery before ever bringing a lawsuit. Just like you can scope out how big of a problem is this? Who is it differentially impacting the most? What kind of legal claim should we even be bringing based on the facts of this issue? And so we had thousands of members participate in that survey, on the number of thousands of people gave data collectively or asked to stay abreast of this issue in a very intense way. Much smaller number of people, but probably in the hundreds, expressed interest in being one of the kind of participating in one of these more intense kind of ways as bringing a lawsuit. But so that's an example of a survey we did. It completely changed it. Changed what kind of legal argument that we even brought a lawsuit at all, who participated in the lawsuit, who was participated in media campaigns around the lawsuit, and what information was even provided in kind of our initial briefing, et cetera. So it's very concrete, kind of like we surveyed people. And then we also have a rule that like we cannot survey our members again until we kind of close the loop and communicate kind of like we surveyed you. First of all, when we surveyed people, we told them why. We're surveying you because many of you have told us that this is a big issue that you're facing, and we're trying to get a scope of how big the problem is and what the best approaches are to try to address this issue. Then we get data, then we have to say, thank you. Thousands of you, like this many of you replied. Here's what we learned about the data in aggregate. Here's how many people were kind of signed up to participate in various ways. Here are the steps we took following that. Obviously, we would try to be pretty transparent on the front end about like, we may not be able to talk to everybody who signs up, but here are some of the ways we're going to like first come, first serve, like things like that. So we try to be very transparent. I think ethically, this is really important. We get asked almost every week by researchers, like if they can survey our members about X or Y, because I do think we probably have like a richer access to potential data about asylum seekers in the United States than anyone in the country except like the federal government. But I think we have that because we respect our members' time and we don't survey them a lot for no reason. So I think there's kind of like a moral issue, which is like people are busy. They're not less busy than I am. They're probably more busy than me. I don't reply to a lot of surveys for no reason. I think that the other reason is because honestly, that helps with uptake, right? Like I think a lot of us are in situations where someone randomly texts us and asks us for like, how was your experience at the doctor's office? And we're like, I don't really believe that they're going to change anything about the way the doctor's office is run by me filling out the survey, so I'm not going to do it. So part of it is also like really making people believe that there's value, like that this is a process where when you participate in it, something happens, you know what happens, like the loop gets closed, right? Like it's kind of infuriating how many surveys we've all filled out in our life and never been told again, like, was like, did something change? Like, how were the results used? Like, did the world, So I think that we just like don't believe in that. And we try to make sure that our members know, like, we only ask for their time when we're fighting on their behalf and for something they've asked us to do.
Yeah, that seems like some very important lessons. I just see a comment here. Yeah, so people can ask questions throughout. I don't think that we're fine with being sort of interrupted. The only thing is I can't see the hands up, so someone needs to tell me if there's a hand up or in the chat and I can call on a name. But we're also going to leave time out at the end for questions, just a free for all. So yeah, so at this time, yeah, I'll just keep going, but feel free to maybe type your name in the chat if you want to ask a question, and I'll just call on you. But about those surveys and that data, I'm just curious and have to ask, is there sort of a reuse of that data, a collecting of that data into databases, into like some sort of structured form? Like, what is the sort of life cycle of that data?
That's a great question. I think arguably we could be doing more on that front of like building a long-term richer and richer data set. I think like in the cycles we tend to operate in, we're more like mission, where we're just like, we're trying to solve this problem, like let's get some data, let's immediately use it to some end, and then let's like maybe then collect another round, or a new issue has happened or something, or now we found a fix and the government wants a list of everybody impacted because they're going to go fix it for those specific people. And so, it can look like different things, but I think we're usually very kind of so action oriented that I think that we're like leaving something on the table probably in terms of like the ability to like aggregate this data longer term. I think some of that is also about anonymity and like, I don't know that we necessarily want like, suppose you could imagine a world in which like for every single member, in theory, you could be like, did they answer this survey? Did they answer this survey? Did they answer? Like, what's the total amount of information? But like, I don't like until, again, I guess in keeping with the theme, until we could articulate like, why will that help us to achieve more kind of collective things on behalf of our members, then it seems like we're only producing a risk, which is like, sometimes the safest way to deal with data is to not have it. Or to not kind of assemble it in like increasingly identifying forms. So I think that we would just kind of have to have a better reason about why we were trying to assemble like an even richer, longer term data set before we did it.
Okay, it looks like Essie has a question. You want to go ahead?
Yeah, hi. Thank you so much for holding this meeting. This is very interesting. And I'm a grad student. I'm doing my master's in international development. And so it's very close to immigration and refugee work. So I really appreciate this conversation. I wanted to go back to an earlier comment that you made about how there's a bit of a discrepancy between, like the conversations that are out there about needing more access to free lawyers, and then your members saying that's not really what we're advocating for at this time. I was just kind of curious, how come that there's a difference, and what do you think, like who are the people that are saying, we want more free lawyers? And like, I'm almost wondering like if there's a difference between the active members of your organization and like maybe people who are going through the actual immigration system versus like the advocates, and maybe there's like a discrepancy between like the advocates saying no, it makes more sense that we have more lawyers, versus the people who are actually going through the process that are saying like no, we actually just need the forms to be shorter. So I'm just wondering like how come there's a difference.
Yeah, that's a really good
in that scenario. Yeah.
Thanks for joining and thanks for the question. It's a really good question. I think it speaks to a couple things. One is actually those are both maybe like it might be examples of like two groups agreeing on the problem, which is like the system is currently too complex for the average immigrant to participate in the system in like a full and meaningful way. And then like two very different solutions to that problem. So I think there's at least maybe good news is, at least in this example, most people, everyone can agree that like there is a problem with like systems complexity or something. And that's not always the case. Sometimes it's even worse than that. Like there's not even fundamental agreement about whether something is a problem or not. So this is good news. I think in terms of what is this is kind of what I was talking to earlier about kind of like a lot of times, when we talk about participation, like a group of people getting to participate, there's kind of like not an explicit conversation about like what does it mean to participate? Like what should be participatory? Is it what should be participatory? Like what problem gets solved? Should it be that we vote on a representative who then gets to decide everything, both the problems and the solutions? Should it be that people get to decide the problem and the solutions? Should they get to decide how much they participate? Like, do they have to participate? So there's a lot of really confusing questions, I think, like in practice about participation. And I think one thing that's different about ASAP is I think we try to push it's just like, what's the most participating that like, we make it optional, so no one is forced. But optionally, like what's the most people could want to participate? Let's not assume people don't want to participate in things. Let's see, like, let's test out. Like, I do think sometimes ASAP is like a little bit of like a participation lab where like people are like presuming people don't want to like make a decision about X or Y. That's too in the weeds. The decision needs to be made too quickly. It's too legal, like, and we're like, well, let's give it a shot, And so I think that this is an example of having our members kind of like participate in crafting solutions, not just problems, and then that looking different. Whereas I think other places in the immigrants' rights movement, not all, I think there are other organizations that do a lot of work with participation and they just have a different population of people who have like are in a different posture in the immigration system. But I think the average immigrants' rights organization like doesn't have the technology, doesn't have the time, doesn't have, I mean, maybe the commitment, I don't know, like a lot of different reasons, but I don't think they're all like negative, ill will reasons, like doesn't have the ability to pull to find out what is the solution that people even want to this problem, right? So they might be correctly identifying like a lot of people we're working with as like individual clients like don't seem to be understanding like what's going on with this legalese and they need help and they don't have the ability to zoom out and be like, but can we ask all 300 of the people we've served, would they rather us try to solve that by getting them a lawyer or by trying to make the process simpler, right? So I think that some of it is just like simply communication or process. The other thing is that I think that there's some presumption sometimes made about like harm, like about risk and harm or something. And it's like people who are in the system themselves should get to make more of those choices too, right? So like an example is like, I think there's some good, like, why are people trying to get everyone a lawyer? I think they're really worried that like every day someone is going to court and they're having a judge talk at them saying like nonsense words that don't mean anything. Like none of us also would understand that equivalent level of words in a legal area that we hadn't been like devoting a lot of time to. And then like some decision gets made and the hearing is over. And like, that's not a pleasant thing to witness. And it does make you feel like, wow, there should just be someone here to translate the legalese of this every single day. Like that's a valid human response or something. But, and to take a slightly longer term view is risky, right? To be like, instead of like the maximum harm, like I want to get a lawyer next to every person today. Instead, I want to like fundamentally fix the system to like have less reliance on lawyers or to have more self-determination or something is like a little bit of like a longer term strategy. And like, it's not I shouldn't be the one to make a choice about like what time horizon of change we're trying to go after. Like that's for people who are kind of in the system right now to decide about. So I think that, you know, and there are other reasons they might think that. They might be like, well, the lawyer's going to help explain it to me legally, but they don't care about my case as much as I do. They're not going to make sure to like explain everything to me that the judge, like, you know, I've seen that too. I've been in courtrooms where like, I mean, like the US immigration system, it's like, if you do not speak English, the only thing that gets translated in immigration court is when someone is directly asking you a question. Nobody, they don't, there's an entire, there'll be like an hour, like all kinds of exchanges happen between the judge and the opposing attorney, between the judge and your attorney, like none of that gets translated in the courtroom, only when someone's asking you a question. That's like a wild level of like lack of information for something that's going to determine like how your life safety goes out or something. So I think that there could also be people saying like, well, you know, I've seen people with a lawyer that didn't totally solve the ability to participate in the process or something. So I don't know, it's complicated, but I don't think it's like all coming from like a ill will place or like a lack of caring about what people want. And it's really complicated. And I think and we're not opposed for that reason. Like, it's not like we think people having a lawyer would be bad necessarily. I'm a lawyer, you know, I just like, in theory, I like maybe would have like, could be representing people one-on-one or something. So I'm not opposed to the concept, but it's really just about self-determination. I think I just want to give one concrete example though of quite how much we believe like asylum seekers are capable of making like very sophisticated and good choices, even pretty quickly, just to raise the bar about like what participation could look like. So we, a long time ago, when we had about 5,000 members, our members were telling us like the number one problem right now is people, there are new rules that are coming up that would make it pretty impossible for people to get their first work permit. So I talked before about renewing your work permit. You got a first one. So that's one issue. A separate issue is there were a set of rules coming from the government that were going to make it like unclear whether anybody would ever get their first work permit, like what it would take to qualify. And the lack of promises on processing times meant perhaps nobody was going to get any work permits anymore, functionally. And our members were telling us like, this is the single biggest concern we have about the current US immigration system. That was a time, I don't remember what it was, 2020. It was a tough year in US immigration. There was a lot of things going wrong. It was like on the front page of the news every single day. It was even making the international news, like what a disaster the US immigration system was. And not a one of those articles talked about the problem of initial work permits for asylum seekers, right? Like that is not the scope of what the media cared about. That was not what the public was picking up as like their number one issue, but it's what our members were telling us was like the single biggest issue they were facing. That was really interesting. That's another thing where it's like, immigration system is broken. How do we fix it? Let's fix this one specific thing would help us a lot. Like there's not a chance anybody who worked at ASAP would have like correctly pinpointed that issue as being the one that we should try to challenge in the courts or something. But our members like correctly identified that as like obviously correctly identified it as their pain point. But then we basically brought a lawsuit about that. But one of the questions we asked our members in the lawsuit was kind of like, should we bring, there's a couple different ways you can bring a lawsuit. An organization can bring it and say like, hey, ASAP, the organization is having a tough time. This law, changing these laws is really making our job hard. Like that's an argument you can make. Another way you can bring it is as a collective of directly impacted people. You guys might think of like a class action lawsuit or something. There's an associational basis lawsuit that's kind of like, we are a group of people who all stand to be harmed if this law goes into effect. So we asked our members like, hey, how do you want us to bring this lawsuit? Do you want to bring it as a collective? That's a big choice for you. At that point, they were pretty under the radar as a collective. They would be identifying themselves as a collective directly to the federal government. And there were a lot of risks inherent in that. So our members took a first vote and they were like, yes, we would like to bring that lawsuit collectively. Then there was a second choice, which was like, okay, to bring in a lawsuit as a collective, you need to decide like how much information do you want to divulge about like who you are as a collective. The more information you divulge, the stronger the legal argument is going to be, and the more a judge is likely to agree with you. The less, however, the more information you divulge directly to the federal government, the more risk you're taking related to your case and your advocacy. So here's kind of like a top level of information you could divulge. Any lawyer would have been like, that is the one we need to do. A middle level, that's kind of like, you might be less likely to win your legal argument, but like you're going to be safer too as individuals. And a third one, which is like, we're never mind. Now that we've heard about this, we don't want to divulge any information that's too risky. Our members chose like this middle option. They voted and chose the middle option, and a judge ended up agreeing with them, and they won that part of the case, and they ultimately won the case as a whole. And that's like a pretty powerful example of like, lawyers would definitely have made the choice to divulge like the maximum amount of information, because lawyers are trained to just like win the case, like not think about the risks about like, sometimes to a human, it might be worth it to lose the case if it meant preserving your physical safety, right? But like lawyers, no, that's not winning to a lawyer, because they would have like lost in court. So so our members told us like, take the middle ground. Like we may be more likely to lose, but we're also like fundamentally here trying to live safe lives in the United States. So that was like a really powerful example of like, I think the average lawyer would think like, we're gonna like ask people about how to make your associational standing argument in federal court. Like, no, this is nonsense, but that was an example where our members like really made that is correct choice. Like certainly it was the optimal choice, like looking back, right? In terms of like you could win and not divulge that information. And honestly, that helped to learn other things, right? Like that could also push like legal precedent and like legal behavior in general, right? Like if lawyers have always been maximizing how much information they divulge, they've never been actually playing around in this like test lab world of like, actually, what if you don't do that? Like, can you still win? Is this now we've learned something kind of useful for when people are trying to bring collective lawsuits in the future? So I think that we just like really believe like until proven otherwise, like let's see if our members like can participate in X or Y, and like let's see how it goes, and we can learn something from the process. But we're all like guessing anyways. You might as well guess in the direction of like self-actualization or something, and be wrong is maybe better than like guessing in the direction of like, I don't know if people want to participate to that level, so let's not ask.
Wow, what a profound example of like why you need community members to actually participate in the decision-making process. I wouldn't have even thought about some of the things you answered with. So that is very, very interesting. Thank you.
Thanks. And I mean, I'm really excited that you all like care about these issues. I think that there's like a lot. I used to work as not as advanced as you all, but I was once like an AI researcher and worked kind of like thinking I would get a PhD in my career. And I just feel like there weren't a lot of like this kind of space or people thinking about or caring about this kind of issue. So it's really exciting that this space is here now, and there are 2,000 people and counting.
It looks like we have another question from Galen.
Yeah, thanks. This is really interesting. I was wondering, so you've talked a lot about, I guess you could characterize them sort of as like successes in the participatory process. But one thing, I've done some like human-computer interaction research that's involved surveys. One outcome, you know, if you maybe have like a survey that's not so well designed, or you don't entirely understand the research question, is that you get some kind of like, you know, ambiguous result. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about sort of maybe lessons learned, or sort of ways that you've changed as you've sort of tried to scale up this sort of like participatory process.
I think that's a really good question. I think that, well, I mean, one set of things that could be happening, right? Like in all of these surveys is like, is that a truly representative outcome? Like, you know, I think that's something that I think we like could spend more time on, and we haven't yet, but I'm sure there's like a lot of lessons there, which are like, just because thousands of people participated doesn't mean that that's like a representative set. It doesn't mean that everybody even like could access, like, you know, there's always, we're always trying to like push at the boundaries of accessibility. So I think one of the things that we're trying to understand better over time, but I don't have like good lessons for you yet, are just kind of like, who is participating? And maybe this speaks a little bit to your question, Kristen, about like the richest data set, like, could we be assembling a richer data set? Like maybe one reason to do something along those lines is to just understand like, well, first I'd say we collect data both like surveying our members, but also like members essentially voting with their feet, right? Like we have about 600,000 members. They're accessing our resources online like 5 million, 6 million times a year. And that sounds like great. Wow, everyone's really accessing the resources. But it could be that actually like our members from certain continents or certain regions are accessing the members like 20 times each, and our members from other places are not accessing them. And so I don't think that right now we have like a great, very sophisticated understanding of like, exactly how representative is participation in some of these surveys, et cetera. And I think there's like a lot of like time we should eventually spend there, and lessons to be learned there, that I'm sure like we could be improving things. So I don't know that that's like a great like concrete lesson. I mean, I think that that's one thing. I think that we have not really allowed ourselves to do like very broad surveys yet, and that might be part of the reason, is like what you're pointing out, which is like it might be hard to figure out the right way to do those surveys. So one thing that we talk about a lot is like, should we do like the annual census of asylum seekers in the United States? Like, should there be some effort to be like, we're just going to try, but like, again, like what, be able to tell our members, why are we doing that? What's the purpose, et cetera. But if so, like, how might we think about what are the questions we ask there, and how might we design them? So, you know, it's like, that's all harder to do when it's not like such a short inference from like the results to like the action. But I think because we're doing surveys so much, to be like, all right, now we're at this stage of the lawsuit, we got to decide between strategy A and B. Like that kind of survey is easier to write in many ways, because it's like so clear, like how you're going to get from one path to the other. So I don't think we've done like a lot of like failures in terms of surveys not leading us to know the outcomes, but I think that's in part because of like how we've restricted the type of surveys we've done to our members. And I don't think that's a restriction that is like a correct long-term restriction or something, but just like, it is like, I agree with you, it's harder to think about how to do that other kind of survey well.
Any follow-up, Galen?
Just no, thanks. That's answered my
Okay.
question. Thanks.
Anna, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks so much, Swapna, for this example. I think that's really, really telling. And I'm wondering with relation to what you said earlier on this process, that you have people who are waiting for renewal of this like work visa. And I'm assuming there's this like process or pipeline between like work visa, green card, naturalization. Where in this process do you see the biggest obstacles, and where can the work of ASAP can contribute the most in this like pipeline? In a way. So I hear, for example, that one obstacle is like renewal of visas, and that's where you can like figure out that this is an issue through the survey, and that would be one example. Are there others that you find relevant here?
Yeah, those are good questions. So I think that, yeah, I think like, where do we think it's just, I feel like I've been doing this for so long that I have like no independent thoughts about anything about the immigration system. I can just like answer collectively what have our members told us. But I think that, you know, they're telling us basically things related to backlogs, and number one, backlogs, number two, things about work permits, and number three, about accessibility and transparency are the issues our members are telling us are the biggest ways ASAP can help them. And so that's what we're trying to do. But I think that it's making me think of like another another thing that's like very, well, I guess maybe two things. One is just another difference between like our members include hundreds of thousands of people who've been detained in like some pretty horrific conditions. I don't know how much everybody knows about the US like immigration detention system, but like many people, whether you present yourself, like just like whether you proactively present yourself to the government or not, like many people end up in what have been come to be known in like Spanish as like the hileras, like the freezer box or whatever. And like las perreras, like the dog cages is like that's conventionally what just like human beings have named their experiences of like the kind of detention centers they've been held in. That's horrifying to hear about. That's obviously, I don't think very many people agree that's like how humans should be treated. I don't think people really understand those conditions. There were dozens or hundreds of people being held in these kind of rooms at once, including kids, infants, you know, like, and so that's horrible. And I think that nevertheless, our members are telling us like, but we don't want you to focus on fixing the detention centers. I think that's really interesting because I think it's, I think also, you know, I think you all are like of the mind of like, there can be surprising results when you poll people, but I think this is almost to like Essie's question, like, where are there discrepancies between what we're doing and what the rest of the immigrants' rights movement are doing? Like, that's a big example of one where like, I think if you asked most people, they would say one of the biggest points of place we could be spending advocacy time and focus is about fixing the US detention system and like the process by which people are like first welcomed or processed into the United States. And our members were like, no, like they've been through it. We are probably surveying more people who've been through that than like anyone else. And they're just telling us like, don't focus there. I've thought a lot about like, why is that the case? And I think about my own family and I think about like the fact that I'm, you know, my parents are immigrants. I have like dozens, if not more, relatives who are immigrated in the past, immigrating now. There's like it's a very constant topic in my family. And I think that not one of that, like that everybody is also similarly fixated on these things, like, but can I work? You know, like, can I just like build some stability here? And I've realized that it's not that members aren't also trying to solve like the immigration detention system, but that there's like two ways to solve like the problem of people being detained really harshly at the border. One is to like fix the conditions at the border, but the other is to like amass enough power and mobility that you can bypass the border, right? Like a bunch of us didn't come to the US through the border, and that's because we had access to figure out how to apply for a school as a way to come here. We had a relative who could sponsor us. We could get a job while we were still abroad and get a visa so we could just like fly here, you know? So there's like other ways to solve the problem of the border. And I think that our members are often telling us like, kind of like, it's another good example of like, we might agree with the problem, but the solutions can look very different in practice in terms of like what should be pursued. And so like, I just wanted to give that analogy or that explanation to say like, I think that our members are telling us if we can fix backlogs and we can fix work permits, that will fix the problem. Like they're probably 1 degree or 2 degrees removed this million people from a lot of the people who are going to have to come through the border and experience those like terrible conditions, et cetera. And I think they're telling us like, let us like put the power in our own hands and we're going to start solving some of these problems. We've seen people fighting about it for a long time. Doesn't seem like anyone's winning. Like maybe we can just like take this into our own account. And that's true for my family, right? And I think it's true for a lot of immigrant families that like the first people to immigrate had like a much tougher time, or the first subset of people, right? But like the 12th person to immigrate or the next generation or something had a much nicer experience of it. And that's because like no one is more invested in the experience of immigrants coming over to the United States than people who like care and like love those immigrants directly. You know what I mean? Like no one's more motivated to solve the problem. They just like need to have some baseline level of resources to solve the problem. So I wanted to explain that I think like we think we're getting at a lot more problems than just backlogs and work permits. We're just staying like really laser focused on what our members, like how our members are telling us to kind of solve issues in the immigration system.
Okay, that's it's been really a great question so far. I know we're at 7 o'clock. Are we gonna need to wrap up, Anna?
I think maybe we can add one more question, either from the audience or perhaps on advice to researchers to how we can do more work interdisciplinary, whatever you think is best, Kristen.
Yeah, if there's not someone who wants to take the last question, I think that's a great one. So thinking that I'm not sure who the audience is here today, but a lot of EMO members are sort of from quantitative fields and generally researchers. If you have advice on ways people can sort of contribute to these issues and topics that you sort of brought up today.
Sure. I mean, I always feel kind of bad because I know that everyone's like very busy, so everyone's like looking for any more jobs when you're a grad student or a faculty member, especially if it's true that most of you are junior faculty members, like pre-tenure, then like I'm not sure adding something to your plate is productive. However, I'm married to a professor, by the way, so I feel like I have some empathy. But who is actually a co-author of next week's speaker, Melissa Dell. So it's a small world, but I will say that I think the more that research can be like from day one embedded with like a community group, like it's just this general theme of like, I just really believe, and I participated in a lot of it, like as a researcher myself, always was in this other category of like design a lot of things and then see if the community likes it or something, or it works. You know, I worked at the Poverty Action Lab, for instance, and I'm not saying that I don't know how all of their interventions get designed, but like it's well established kind of like at the end, you can evaluate whether an intervention worked or not. And there's like a lot of time spent on that. However, I think that like more time could be spent on like, how did we, like, what interventions are even being tried in the first place? What problems are we even trying to solve in the first place? Like, you know, I do think it's important to have like sound understanding of like what worked and what didn't, but I think we can get like a lot farther towards guessing solutions that will work the more informed the original hypotheses and the like original interventions are by like the population to begin with or something. And that could save a lot of time and pain from like bad results or something later on, because I think that communities who are directly impacted, like they've often, you know, again, they maybe didn't use like exactly scientific processes to determine what worked or didn't, but they have like a huge amount of like insight about what is like more likely to work or what is unlikely to work. And so I just feel like there's almost supposed to be like a whole different area of the discipline that's kind of like, we spend 1 year making sure we actually chose the right things to test before we launch this multi-pronged 3-year process where we collect a bunch of survey data and then like analyze the results at the end. But again, I feel bad too. I don't think that's a very like easy thing to do. I don't think you all have like nothing but time. So I'm not trying to suggest that's an easy suggestion.
But I think it's like a great one for us all to hear. What I'm hearing is just this idea of bringing in the affected groups from the very, very beginning of any sort of like attempt to design a project or solve a problem.
And maybe I'll just say one last thing about to close the loop, where I told you there were 5,000 members who pinpointed initial work permits as their biggest issue at a time when like the entire world was paying attention to US immigration issues. And nobody, not once, was writing an article about this work permit thing. Those people were so right that was the reason we grew. When they won that lawsuit, that's when ASAP grew from 5,000 to 250,000 members, because people were so like interested in that win and making use of that win that they affiliated with the organization. It's not, you know, since then we've continued to grow for other reasons, but like that's such a powerful example of like, there is nothing the co-founders of ASAP could have possibly done on our own or dreamed of that would have grown us from 5,000 to 250,000 members just on this planet, except like listen to those 5,000 people tell us the thing that asylum seekers cared about most when no one else seemed to be listening or hearing that lesson. And so I think that it's also like such a powerful example of like making things work, right? Like getting results, like you're more likely to get groundbreaking results, like just selfishly, like set aside all the ethics and the morals of the issue. You're more likely to get groundbreaking results, like if you like get the insights everyone else is missing about like what's likely to be like the difference maker in a situation.
Excellent. Okay, thank you very much. I think we can end on that sort of informative and hopeful note. Thank you for sharing all these stories. It was super interesting. It's clear from the audience questions, I think. I'm not the only one who feels that way. And thank you also everyone for joining and joining the discussion. So that's all from me. And I can say goodbye. I don't know if Anna has any closing words or if
Oh, that's it. Thank you so much. And we'll see you in 10 days, basically, with our next colloquium. But thank you so much, both Swapna, Kristen, and everyone else who has questions.
Thank you guys. Bye, everyone.
everyone.
Bye. Thank you.